Welcome to the Technical Session 7 in IIA Rajasthan Architecture Festival 2022. My name is Prachi Asthana and I'm your host for the afternoon session. I seek your cooperation in getting started with this session. I request you all to please be seated and the session will start in few minutes now. Please turn off your mobiles and put them on silent to avoid any interruptions. If you plan to leave the hall while the session is in progress, please be mindful so as not to distract our speakers. So now I would like to introduce the concept and the topic of this technical session. Rolf Emerson said, "If the tongue had not been framed for articulation, man would still be a beast in the forest." With this session, we explore ahead on evolution of inherited perception, focusing on the relativity of inherited perception and its evolution with time. Now, to help us understand this better, we have with us architect Dean De Cruz, our moderator for the session. Architect Dean De Cruz is a partner, principal architect, Mosaic Design Combined, Goa. A graduate in architecture, is actively involved in professional practice as well as in academics. He has conducted numerous workshops and seminars on architecture, planning, and the environment across India as well as abroad, with numerous awards and publications across the globe. Now I would like to introduce our speakers, our honorable speakers, Professor Charanjit Singh Shah. He's a founding principal architect and a Creative Group Delhi. Professor Charanjit Singh Shah is an architect, planner, and an infrastructure expert with 5 decades of practice. He is an author, scholar, educationist, teacher, art and architecture critic practicing sustainable green architecture. His work speaks of his contribution looking beyond architecture and development of large infrastructure projects like airports, metros, railway stations, transit-oriented development, intermodal hub, and creating sustainable, walkable, cyclable neighborhoods and creating Indian sustainable smart cities of tomorrow. He is being adorably called as Airport King. Our next speaker is architect Melvin H.J. Tan. Mr. Melvin is the Deputy Managing Director and founding partner of Lord Architects Private Limited, a Singapore-based practice established in 2004. Lord Architects is an award-winning boutique practice having received numerous awards, along with being the finalist in World Architecture Festival and most notably President Design Awards. Our next speaker is architect Sandeep Shikre. Architect Sandeep Shikre spearheads SSA Architects. He is an USGBC lead accredited professional for green buildings and has a deep commitment towards sustainable development. He is the founding member and chairman of Indian Green Building Council, Mumbai chapter. He is a patron of Council for Tall Buildings in Urban Habitat, Chicago, and is an advisory committees for several forums. He has recently been honored with Senior Fellowship Award by IGBC. Architect Vivek Gupta, Arvind Vivek and Associates, New Delhi. He is our next speaker. A design practitioner with over 35 years of experience in the field of urban planning, architecture and interiors. He is a firm believer in built-to-suit architecture, which comes with a strong acknowledgement of climate, coordinate and client. So a very hearty welcome to all our speakers and our moderator of this session. So before the session ends, there will be a question answer session for this after the session ends. So please be precise with your questions and be ready with your questions. Now I would hand over the session to our moderator, Architect Dean De Cruz.
pointer's working. No, this one is right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. If you notice the pink for the Pink City. The evolution of inherited perception, a real tongue twister of a topic. But it's broad enough for us to actually interpret it the way we want to and speak our minds on what we think heritage has happened to our heritage and where we're going as architecture in India. So the best place to start, of course, is Rajasthan itself. Rajasthan, which is rich in its materials, rich in its craftsmanship, creating an architecture of pavilions that respond to the climate, an architecture of courtyards, an architecture that responds to the day and the night, to the various seasons that we have, an architecture that's true to its location, an architecture of luxury, an architecture, because of the low lights, it actually captures in its craftsmanship methodologies that actually bring in light, extend light within the spaces. An architecture that celebrates its resources, or maybe its lack of resources of water, in various ways. Yeah. All around the world, we have historic architecture which is influencing the way we practice and the way we actually use materials and technologies today. And hospitality is one of the drivers. So in the Middle East, for example, hospitality has been driving the way architecture has been moving in many ways. In religious places as well, contemporizing an architecture with structural systems, with shading systems in very dramatic ways, drawing the essence of the architecture out, but using technologies that are available today. This, of course, is the mosque where basically the whole building can collapse, the roofing system collapses. Jali is another element, well known in Rajasthan and very appropriate for a hot and dry climate, but doesn't mean that it has to be used in a traditional way. If you look at the work of Jean Nouvel, I mean, in this building, the way the Jali has actually been turned as a contemporary technological element into the architecture and integrated. So technology does not necessarily need to, stay in its past with its traditional materials. It can also morph into new materials and new elements as well. All over the world, in Pacific Islands, they draw the natural elements, the colors that are local to the area, in the Mediterranean and the Greek islands, drawing out the essence of what's available around them and responding to the climate in the best way they know. In Southeast Asia, for example, the brilliant examples of architecture, drawing from the past and contemporizing it in a way which is fresh and responsive to that climate. In India, we have a varied climate, from hot and humid, hot and dry, cold, Ladakh, in other parts, dry parts of India, in wet parts of India like Kerala. But how do we interpret this in our modern day architecture? We as a firm of architects were very early influenced by Baker. And Baker is a very Kerala architecture, but it hardly uses any of the traditional Kerala elements. So early work, of course, was responsive to Baker's style, but also had needed to respond to a contemporization of what we call the Goan architecture. So over the years, we've designed and built houses, restoring the craftsmanship. We've trained about 200 masons in our practice over the years, recalling traditional methods of building, but always responding actually to the climate. A traditional Goan architecture, actually, it may be very pretty, but actually is a very poor climatic response. Small windows, a tile roof system which heats up, poor lighting levels in the building. So we found a responsive architecture, more appropriate to go was actually in the southern regions of Kerala. And we actually created an architecture that was more pavilion in its style, looking at an architecture that opened out, that actually even used Kerala craftsmen. We had got roofing carpenters down to actually build a lot of these roofing systems, creating pavilions that were transparent, allowing light and air through the buildings. In the spa for the Taj, it's an Ayurvedic spa. So we looked at the Kerala snake temples and drew from that the elements of that temple, creating spaces which are responsive in the way the Kerala temples have, of creating controlled light systems that actually bounced off and not direct, from water bodies, creating inner walls which are lit actually by diyas, and surfacing the building in traditional methods. Of course, being a spa, we indulged ourselves in certain. A traditional Goan architecture is something which is far close. So in our interpretations and our extensions of a traditional Goan architecture, we ensured that our spaces were brighter, lighter. So even the large wooden system that we actually use for roofing, we actually fragmented that into smaller elements, almost like waste piece of wood, into a 6-planar truss for the roofing systems, created hot air escapes. Working for the Taj, for the holiday village, we felt the need to respond to traditional architecture, show that it's traditional, but add on the elements of verandas and balconies, which are traditional to Goa, as the ventilation element of these units. Further south of Goa, this is the cathedral we designed, a very unorthodox cathedral, which has the entrance even eccentric to it. But what we did is create a roofing system that floated above, a roofing system that actually ventilated through and through, creating a pavilion-like space. And so also in our hotels, basically creating an architecture that's meant for a hot and humid climate, transparent and open. But working in a hot and dry climate for the university, Kannada University, we had to respond to the very strong architectural history of the area. Being a hot and dry climate and being an area which used stone as its main material, we had to respond. So we actually used stone completely in its structural system, right from the plinths, the columns, the walls, and the roofing system, to create this building. And the gopurams were the traditional elements which anchor temple complexes were actually wind towers. So it actually drew in hot air at a high level where radiant heat is not there, humidified it, and drew it into the central bit. It's about 50,000 square feet of building. And a giant corridor, being a very intense climate with harsh sunlight, created these deep, almost 13 feet corridors which shaded the building. But what do we do in an area which doesn't have a traditional strong architecture? We work a lot in the jungle, creating jungle lodges. So we need to draw from what is vernacular, what is traditional to the area, and involve the people of the area. So this is in Bandipur, where we actually use the stonemasons in the area to create the structural systems, the thatch systems, the ornations. And this is in Bandhavgarh for the Taj, a very simple sort of hut-like structure built in mud, but with a hollow wall system. The men of the village actually built the structure. The women decorated it. You can see around the windows, and that's our first guest there on the right. And use, of course, the craft of the area, drawing in whatever materials that could be used in the building, and creating something very simple. Even the roof is actually made of the local forest wood from dead trees from the area. So it's a response to what's available directly around us. This is the Janaman retreat. Again, responding to a traditional architecture. It's in an old orchard area and created like a very farmhouse area, but contemporizing it and making it luxurious to some extent, being a hospitality project. Yeah. But architecture doesn't necessarily need to follow a particular style. If you look at India, and it's the melting pot of cultures over centuries, and Goa especially, where I'm from, has become a melting pot of cultures with tourism at a high level. So in this hotel project, we felt we didn't really need to express even a Goan architect, but something which is more international in a way, drawing from various architectural elements from across the world. And so this is Delaya, which is right on top of the hill. So we drew elements from across and used, in fact, waste materials. You can see Iranian tiles and Kerala columns, and created an architecture that was free-flowing and expressive of different parts of the world. This is a brick dome, which is about 11 meters in diameter, just built in mud, in clay bricks with mud mortar joints, and covered over, and of course, little mirror work on the ceiling. So drawing elements from all over the world. This is, of course, one of the rooms. Again, a simple brick dome, using, again, strong interior elements from a traditional vernacular style. But one of the most iconic sort of examples that one can give of drawing from the past and actually projecting into the future is what we see in Star Wars. I mean, the way they're able to anchor our memories in these buildings and sort of transport you at the same time into the future is one of the most beautiful examples of how we can actually draw from the past, root it into the present, and project it into the future. So with that, may the force be with the rest of you all. Thank you.
I would like Professor Charanjit Singh Shah, sir, to present.
Good afternoon. You know, no airport today, and we were actually assigned a job in a two-tier city that is near Raipur. A client said, "यार mall बनाना है." As usual, mall concept is, कहता है maintenance cost will be about 15 to 18 rupees per square foot. तो two-tier city में नया रायपुर में मॉल चलेगा नहीं. मैंने कहा कोई बात नहीं, हमारे भी पंगे लेने की आदत है. तो हमने कहा हम नॉन एयर कंडीशन बनाएंगे. That is how उसके दिमाग में कुछ खड़का. He said, "You making a sense? Can you explore it?" I said, "Okay, we'll explore it." So that is what I tried, the great heritage of our country, to the Vastu Shastra, the scientific Vastu Shastra. Can we really make things sustainable without AC? So that is what I tried in this. But mall में हर आदमी कहता है बड़ा डायनेमिक भी हो, iconic हो, all that also happens. So let's see that how we put together things together. Like in Vastu we say north is the lowest, southwest the highest, get the, and then the basic principles of architecture. How do you get north glare-free light within your building? How do you protect from the southwest sun? And how do you see that you protect your building from glared west? How do you layer your building? How you envelop your building and how you showcase your building? So that is what we tried. Various passive ways and getting a lead from some dono din gay suvere heritage walk. Fantastic things we saw. All those things. Perhaps today's question was, can we really regenerate what we see and we produce water like 200 years back, they produce water. And today when we went there, we saw the stepwell all khali, no water. Why can't we do that, which perhaps with no technology of that nature, they were able to do? So now my presentation would be very simple है यार. एक छोटी सी चीज़ को मैं थोड़ा लंबा करके बताऊंगा आपको, लेकिन है सबको आपको मालूम है आपको कि यार ये तो पता था, ये क्या गप मार के चला गया बंदा, है ना? लेकिन 50 साल से मैं गप मार रहा हूँ. I am very sustainable. छोटी सी जगह मिल जाए वहाँ बैठ जाऊंगा. Similarly, one of my first building, तो मैंने कहा यार इसमें देखना है how the oscillation of sun can be protected, and I live in a hot dry climate. Can I protect? फिर मैं कपड़े डालता हूँ ऊपर, पहले शीशा पर लगाता हूँ, फिर कहता हूँ यार इसको डबल ग्लास करो, ये करो, वो करो. आजकल का कॉस्मेटिक आर्किटेक्चर. एंड देन वी से इट्स ग्रीन, इट्स हेरिटेज. कल बात हो रही थी, यहीं पे फोरम पे बैठे थे, हेरिटेज का ब्यूटीफुल थिंग्स वर देयर. देन व्हेन वी वर डूइंग कंजर्वेशन, we were trying to look upon lime लगाऊं, सुर्खी लगाऊं, what are those materials? But when it came to MEP, he said air conditioning लगाऊंगा. He is putting everything which is not heritage, whereas the volume of our palaces doesn't need that sort of an air conditioning. Can we look? It's an alarm to me. Can we look beyond copy paste? And again we say, यार आज का बंदा चाहता है यार हर जगह air condition हो. Can we create that sort of a temperature where I conserve my energy? That is the conscious effort of this great 3 days conference. Nick, okay, I am a little weak in this. Yeah. This is, I was nomad, very happy, and this is, now I become robotic. मैं कभी कभी कमरे में जाता हूँ, मुझे समझ नहीं लगता है स्विच कौन सा बंद करूँ खोलूँ. Every time I am into the confusion and I cannot conclude. So this is what we're doing. From organic to artificial. कहीं चले जाओ यार, कहते घास, कहते artificial है ये. Astroturf, green. That is what we are very happy with that. And किसी का देखे lips, कहते यार लाल हैं, कहते नहीं lipstick लगाई है. Why? Because ये तो लाल है ही. So let's see that organism of originality is maintained. And can we see this? Beautiful. We were very happy. Yes, अब तो ये तो सब राजस्थान की तो बात सबने की. I am just putting it क्योंकि लगाना था ये. Now this is simple house. पहले रहते थे. In northeast we have a small batak, and in southwest we have a kitchen. Inside we have a courtyard, and simple. Northeast the lowest, southwest the highest. Cut the southwest sun so that my courtyard is cool enough, and I am not getting the harsh, glared west sun inside the courtyard. And that is how, if I can know how to protect. अभी भी आजकल जाओ ना तो डबल दुपट्टा डाल के रायपुर उधर, all the girls are moving around on the motorcycle and they feel very comfortable. But here, oh यार fashion है, I am sleeveless. Then I say, oh यार skin burnt हो रही है, और फिर मैं cream लगाऊंगा उसके ऊपर, So why all that is happening? Consciously I need to understand. See this section. I adopt this section. Maybe it's a mega project or a micro project. But, if it's Chennai airport, I said, okay, let me see how I get glare-free light. How do I see that I get shaded south and, west light. So basic elements, if you are addressed. This is the mall which we made. This is a location in the Naya Raipur capital city. This is how we layered it outside, and it changed the vision. We said, let's see that we layer it from outside, where I can put the large hoardings, I can get the revenue, and I can also shade my building with the hoarding. So this is how we layer, envelope, and wrap the building, and not rape the building. Today we are raping the building. क्या है, वेस्ट में यार शीशा लगा है, सारा बिल्डिंग बनानी है शीशे की ना, तो वेस्ट में भी शीशा, ईस्ट में भी शीशा, साउथ में भी शीशा है. क्या हो गया प्यार शीशे से? That needs to be addressed, and that is what I started looking at it, how the sun moves, what is the oscillation of sun, and we said, okay, let's create an architecture where I see the northeast, probably not the myth or the ritual vastu, but the actual science of putting everything north the lowest, southwest the highest, so that I cut my southwest sun, so that we did the stimulation. We've gone into the process, and we see that how the shape and size of the building could be generated, orientation of the building can be done, and probably the mutual shading, like Jaisalmer. We had narrow streets. I got no sun, direct sun. I am comfortable. And even in 2 or 3 o'clock, in any of the Rajasthan with 48 degrees temperature. So that is what probably all these elements, then layering, wrapping, and all elements needs to be addressed with sensitizing yourself with the climatical conditions. We did all this. Mind it, It's not, it's a process. It's a process of design when you evolve it and then the form comes. It's like not the form or the function comes first, but it is complementing each other. So this is how we tried, did all this. See the southwest, which is an overhang like that, and I am just cutting my southwest sun. Then he said, okay, getting inspiration from India Habitat Center, how do you cover the courtyard, how do you diffuse the light, because the courtyard I get the south light, south sun which is vertical like this, I need to protect that. So that is what we did. Can you start this? You know, it can move. You can. Oh, sorry. So we just stimulated. Yeah. Stimulated the. See that the harsh sun doesn't go inside the courtyard and then shape out the building. नहीं हो रहा? Never mind. So we just did this and see the shadow, light of the building, and accordingly you practically shape and size of the building is evolved. This is how we did this. And now mind it, now when I'm here in northeast the lowest, southwest the highest, then I get step terraces. I'm trying to use the terrace. Now in a mall, in case I get more areas, I get more revenue. So that is what we did here. Again, in the section, all inspired, you know, like you see this in Masdar city or even here in Asiad village, how these things are being done by the great masters. Masdar city again, you shape it out, you create a corridor with very less penetration of hot light and you are very comfortable in the courtyard. So this is how, again, Jaisalmer, and you are trying to create the volume where you have the mutual shading and the harsh sun or the penetration of south sun, southwest sun is not into the atrium in the courtyard. So all this, then we, on the northeast, you know, then we created, we used all jali there so that from that jali, I get comfortable, cool air. I say, ha, I got hot air when I say, it's cool air. So it basic things, आपको कहीं यार मजाक कर दिया, ये तो पता था. You know, that is, we need to put it in our architecture vocabulary and do it. This is how in the atrium also we tried. And again, this is the interior of the mall. This is the finish, on the day of inauguration. And this is how I'm just getting to know inspiration from the use of jali, contemporary way of use of jali into the contemporary architecture. This is the mall. This is how, even if you see the roof of Louvre Museum in Abu Dhabi, you see this and protecting the direct glare and heat of sun inside the building. This is the interior, and I was told to take only 7 minutes, so I think I have not taken much. Thank you very much, and this is a night shot. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was an amazing presentation. Now I would call upon our next Honorable Architect Melvin H.G. Tan for his presentation. Please welcome.
From a very senior and respected professional, I see the bubbles in everyone's heads asking, how old is this guy? So I'm Melvin, I'm the president of the Singapore Institute of Architects. And if you're wondering, I'm not 35, I'm 47. Because that's what everyone's been asking me every time I come and I say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and then they ask me this question. And interestingly, the whole festival has been about heritage to contemporary, and this being the afternoon of the third day, it almost feels like we'll be looking towards the future. And I titled my talk, or rather my little 10-minute giveaway, The Future of Heritage. I bring greetings to you from the Singapore Institute of Architects. The new council, the 62nd, was just inaugurated last 2 months ago, and I bring you greetings from Singapore. In fact, today, as I present, I'm not going to be speaking on any of my personal Lord Architect works. I'm going to be bringing you 4 projects that have been done by Singapore architects in Singapore, talking about heritage, conservation, and how we're moving towards the future. Conservation in Singapore cannot, or rather in anywhere, cannot happen just by the private sector. It cannot happen just with the public sector. It's very important that all of us come together with regulations, guidelines, and the zest of our designs to bring about greater change. So let me tell you a story a little bit about what Singapore is about. Hopefully all of you will get a better understanding of Singapore. We have the Urban Redevelopment Authority in Singapore. That's the agency that takes care of built environment. The agency is very active in conservation, and they themselves run quite a few initiatives, whether it's heritage guidelines, competitions, and recognitions of the great designs. But at the same time, there are also private sectors that engage on conservation. These are, like, for example, ICOMOS, where they take care of, they come out with guidelines and best practices on conservation, and as well as a local sector called Docomomo, where they, on their website, also list the top or modern 100 buildings in Singapore. Now, this all serves to create awareness amongst practitioners, the public, that those who own great buildings don't end up demolishing it. So this is a picture of early Singapore. And in the early days, before we were founded, it was just vernacular architecture. I know somebody said the word vernacular has always been coming up, right, ma'am? So before we were founded, Singapore was very much like vernacular structures of the Malayan state. And when Sir Ramphel Stamford came to Singapore and founded us in the 1800s, he created a master plan that gave rise to what you see, shophouses, basically shophouses everywhere. As the 20th century continued in the later parts of the 1900s, of course, the automobile came about, etc. This is what you see in Singapore with the shophouses and still the river being used for transport and for commerce. But now today, you will see some of the shophouses still there, right in the front row. And what you will see mostly is all the tall, glitzy buildings there. So back in the early 1900s, or rather 1980s, when modernization was hot on its heels and accelerating, a lot of buildings were being demolished. And of course, everybody wanted a glitzy new building. So a poet, Dr. Goh, actually commissioned one of our prominent architects in Singapore to come up with a plan for conservation. And there's a Chinese word to it, I won't say it, but it means place of ceaseless activity. The idea being, could we make our heritage buildings function not just in the day, but throughout its period of time, 24 hours, 24/7. That master plan wasn't adopted, but the idea of conservation held true. And that sense and that drive towards conservation continued, and this is what we have today, new buildings sitting side by side with conservation buildings. Fast forward, 2015. The difficulty that we're facing now is that buildings built, of course, we're in Rajasthan, right? But in Singapore, we have a very short history. Our conserved buildings are 50, 60, 70 years. We have some 100-year-old buildings. But the ones we talk about are the modernist buildings built in the 60s, in the 70s, with very interesting modern approaches and designs, but challenged, endangered. This is the Golden Mile complex in Singapore, designed by Tay Keng Soon, William Lim, and Gan Eng Ong. And they were the first to begin DP architects. What is so interesting about this building is that recently, the building has been sold to a developer. What happens is that they usually tear it down. But the government came up with some regulations to dictate that this would be retained, but offer some freebies, not freebies, enhanced incentives for the developer. Number one, they get to build an additional 1/3 of GFA over and above what is currently there. They get to amalgamate a site next to the building so that together it would form a new development. They would be able to buy land surrounding it to be able to adjust the boundary. They get tax incentives for all your conserved areas and only be taxed on the new areas. So some of these have come together to allow today new developers to take on old buildings and create something for the future. Of course, these are some other modern buildings in the 60s and 70s, which we hope in Singapore will continue to exist. So I'm going to show you 4 projects that have been award-winning for the Heritage Awards in Singapore, and I'll use these projects to illustrate where we're headed to in the future. I'm going to go from small, medium, and large. So we'll start with any small rooms, some rooms not having a window. The farm architects came in, reverted it back to the original layout of the building, added in a whole slew. So they took on not just architecture, they took on wayfinding, branding, interior design, and you can see it's an Art Deco building, but it's a very funky, upbeat kind of a design. The idea being that they could take what was there previously and modernize it and contemporize it for today. In fact, I was going to say that I feel a little bit of like a fish out of water here because I've seen all the presentations gone by, and everyone's been very rich in its heritage. And if you look at the projects that I'm preparing and presenting, they're almost like too contemporary to be in this sitting. But I hope you enjoy that. But anyway, so this is the Great Madras. What they've done is to open up. If you see on the first floor, the whole ground floor is opened up as a city room. It's accessible to the public. It's where the F&B happens. And what has become of this building? The outcomes is, number one, brands now want to hire this place or take this place for their campaigns. It is a place where the young want to hang out. It's a hip place. It's a area where people gravitate to. So the outcomes are heritage has now become hip for the younger generation in Singapore. Similarly, Kong Guan building, the bottom part is the existing building, and the top areas are the new additions. If you look at it, it's not your typical conservation building. You almost will argue that it's the new overpowering the old. But here, the architect has taken the overall scale, and that's my timer. The overall scale has taken the scale and the form of the existing building and replicated it as a stacking idea up onto the top, right? So does conservation have to be subservient to the existing, or can it be fair play? Here, we think it is fair play. And I'm going to end off with this large project, which is a power station built in the 1926, if I'm not wrong. It used to power all the ports in Singapore. This has just been converted into Dyson's headquarters in Singapore. Dyson being the ones that hairdryer, fan, you know. And what they've done is to repurpose it. These are some external pictures. But if you look at the interiors, some of the things that they've highlighted are the preservations of the existing building, not just that, the accents of the steel members. But what you do see is that what was previously a power station to power an industry that developed Singapore now is almost like a powerhouse of Dyson. Everyone knows Dyson. And they, as a tech company, as a forward-looking company, is able to come in, use that space, and create a sense of place in the city. So, future of architecture, or rather future of heritage. It is important to know that architecture or the heritage is not something that we just look at and enjoy. I'm gonna fathom that we should be looking at the heritage of the future. It's interesting to know that all of us, whatever we do today, will be heritage for someone else in 100 years. So what are you doing today that is for the future? And I know heritage tends to be focused on the past. But since we're going to look at heritage to contemporary today, I'm going to ask that the room thinks about what is our heritage that we are forming for today that will be for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir, for an insightful presentation and a good question for all of us to think about. Now, I would like to call upon our next speaker, Honorable Architect Sandeep Shikre, for his presentation. Please welcome.
Yeah. So after those brilliant three presentations, I'm going to touch a topic in a little different way. So the topic is quite interesting, evolution of inherited perceptions. And the session speaks about current age buildings which have seamlessly imbibed the principles of the ancient architecture and the guidelines. So I have collected few case studies because architects can express their thoughts through a case studies. Some of them are international, some of them are national, and I'll end with one of my projects. So this is a shard in London. It's a very interesting story. All of us, we know that London is so beautiful, low-rise, Canary Wharf, with a beautiful architecture there. A developer went to a master, Renzo Piano, and he said, I want to develop a tall building here, which is almost 600,000 square foot. So the initially architect Renzo Piano told him, no, I don't think that this particular location deserves a tall building. But there was an interesting debate. He said, if that happens, how would our city grow? It's a pressure of our urbanization. It's not a greed, it's a need. That's why I've come to a master, and I want you to create something that will not conflict, but complement the architecture of London. And finally, architect Renzo Piano agreed, and what you see that is coming up there. It's completely modern building. All the materials are modern. All the approaches are today's age approaches. But to me, that building is complementing to that skyline. It respects the contextuality there. It has a kind of a sculpturous form which actually resembles the steeples of the Tower of London. And when you see it together, it kind of gives a very complementing exercise together. You know, that's what I feel, and I fully agree with my international friend. What you create today must become a heritage of tomorrow. And this is one of the beautiful examples, so I thought maybe I'll add it here. And everybody in London is very happy. When this project was announced, there was a big outcry. People were not happy, but eventually, once the building is complete, there's a 10 years of a waiting list to go in this particular building for the offices. The next thing is in Russia. All of you know the St. Petersburg. It's one of the heritage city. The UNESCO rule says that you cannot build anything over 40 meters. Same thing, again, a developer wanted to build a building, a beautiful architecture, which has been there for last so many years. Again, it has a pressure of urbanization. It's got all of these kind of characteristics. And that was a case which went to UNESCO hearing, and the British architect had to go and give a presentation for a high-rise, high-density building. And fortunately or coincidentally, he won the hearing, and then he built the building. That's a plot. And in that plot, the kind of FAR that they had to consume was quite large, and they could get up with this building. So that's a building which is standing tall in St. Petersburg. Again, this particular architecture. Yeah, is my voice not audible to you? Yeah? Yeah. So this particular. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you can see it there, that's a building which is coming up there, which is just next to the old church. And again, this building has a very complementing exercise. It's a needle tower, which is depicted all the characteristics of the architecture which is there in St. Petersburg. And again, it kind of complements the skyline of St. Petersburg. Everybody loves, again, this building out there. This is a building which is probably the world's. No, that's another big architect firm. Ren Bentley. That's a different architecture. So this is a project in New York, again, a project which is next to Central Park on a very small plot, again, the pressure of urbanization, this particular architecture from Shop Architect. They have depicted all the ancient architecture of New York, which is a Chrysler, Empire State, and all of this architecture has been very nicely depicted. They did a lot of exercise to develop this motif, which is again today's age technology. These are terracotta unitized panel. When you go that tall, you have to have some dependency on your technology. Of course, I do agree with our senior fellow that you cannot make a cosmetic building, but to me, these are very intelligent buildings which are very contextual. And that's how you see that particular tower is fully ready there, and it actually gives a very complementing exercise to the whole of the city. That's how it looks there. This is again a very famous project when in Germany, due to the World War, the dome of the Reichstag was demolished, and then they had floated a competition, and the normal Foster's design, which is a glass dome, again it was heavily criticized. How could you replace a stone architecture with a glass dome? But if you'll see, the meaningful glass dome is not only looking nice, but it's very microclimate responsive. It is doing a daylight harvesting, the kind of a shape and the parameter it has, it kind of enhances that particular daylight, and when they have a parliament there, it happens with zero mechanical light being operated there. So it's one of the great examples where you can see how a modern architecture can depict the ancient characteristics and yet be very stunning. To me, this is a heritage for tomorrow. So that's how it is looking there, very nice architecture. Pearl Academy, while I'm in Jaipur, I have to talk about Jaipur, a great design by Morphogenesis Architects. It actually depicts all the principles, the courtyard planning, the evaporative cooling, talk about a jali architecture, glare control. So all of these characteristics that we all know have been very nicely and purposefully depicted over there. That's actually the picture of the building, where you can see there's a nice courtyard, there's a daylight coming in, the water is used for the evaporative cooling, the stepwell concept is used for the students' conglomeration. Very simple, cost-effective cavity wall with a jali outside, which also helps you to put the services, and it actually gives you a nice experiential kind of aspects over there in the building. Each and every character of Rajasthan architecture has been nicely depicted in a modern way. So that's a Pearl Academy. And a last project. This is one of the projects we are doing in Mumbai. Coming from city like Mumbai, we don't have a luxury of a large space and doing a nice biophilic architecture. There's a huge pressure. Again, is it a need or it is a greed? So on a plot, we have something like 22 to 25 times FSI, which has to be consumed. And that's a need. It's not a greed. So this particular project is at Nippensi Road, 327-meter tall building. Can you imagine at that particular level when you are developing a built environment, it has a lot of microclimatic challenges. And how do you meet those? So these are kind of, it's right on the ocean. It receives a cyclonic wind in Mumbai because Mumbai also comes in earthquake zone. So our task was to create this particular duplex apartments. These are 24 duplex and 3 triple apartments. They have all the characteristics of a villa. When it would be on a ground, it has a nice double height lobby. It has got a garden all around it, recessed envelope so that it doesn't take the heat from the southwest. It takes a nice breeze which comes from all. So it's a kind of a whole house nicely enveloped with the green space all around it. But the challenge here that it is at 200 and 300 meter height. So how do you protect? So we thought that, okay, let's create a jali, okay, at that height, which will also do a wind calming and which will also do a glare control and give you a nice thing so that you can use this particular terraces at that height at all given time. And fortunately, we could crack this engineering with one of our great facade engineers, and that's how the whole building would look after it is complete. It has got a beautiful terrace, which is double height, 7.2 meter of height. Each and every room has a stunning view on all 4 sides. It's completely a circular drum. You have a beautiful, that's an actual picture from a 24th floor. These are the decks. And what we wanted to do that these particular decks should be covered with this jali. Entire facade is recessed, so it will never ever receive a direct sun or a direct rain. It's a simple shading device where you have an overhang, acts as a veranda and a terraces. And then those jalis that we had, those red color what you see, those are the motorized jalis. They work with the microclimate response. So whenever you want to be in their terrace, 7.2 meter height, a jali, and the perforation of that jali has been done with the CFD analysis, where you know exactly how it can calm the wind, how it can give you the glare control. It's completely operable. That's how it works. So I feel these are some of the techniques that we will have to use, especially we know that the pressure that is there in megapolis will slowly translate to all the tier 2 cities. We'll all have to be ready. High density, high rise is inevitable. the kind of country where we are living, the population is going to rise, and we have to be prepared for this kind of an architecture. The building actually moves above the sky where the clouds are coming below. So that's how it would be, 327-meter building. So I again echo what my international friend said. What is an architecture of today? You should aspire to make it heritage of tomorrow. Thank you.
An interesting presentation. Now I would like to call upon our next speaker, Honorable Architect Vivek Gupta. Please join in to welcome.
It's always good to be the last one because I could see that everybody has wrapped their minds around their perception of what the topic is. And I tried to ask Dean for the longest that what the topic meant, and I honestly couldn't. And everybody, as you see, has taken it in their own perception. Charanjiji spoke about the Vastu Shastra being evolved into a modern building. Melvin has spoken about conservation of whatever was in Singapore. Sandeep, of course, always to the point. He spoke about the context, which is extremely important. And I also thought that let me just speak on the four words that are there, which is evolution, what is perception, and things like that. I'm quite challenged on anything which is digital. Anyway, this is everything is a matter of perception. So we all know that design is a matter of perception. And what is perception, basically? So what we need to know is perception is what we kind of sense and in our own capacities, and then we give it a shape, and that is what is going to be called as perception. Now, if you see the same picture that I showed you earlier, it's how the perception changes. It's the point of view, it's the context, it's your own personality, it's on your own behavior that'll make the same picture look different. So a perception can be very deceptive. A perception can vary from person to person, from personality to personality. And that, to me, is the perception, and which each one of us had a different perception of the same topic. Now, what is inheritance of design? You know, I always say that there is nothing original under the sun. Everything is biomimicry. You know, if I was to ask you to draw a ghost, what will you draw? You know, because nobody's seen a ghost. So there are references, there are some images. Tomorrow, wind could also be ghost, you know, things like that. So there is, to me, everything is perception through biomimicry, some kind of a form, shape that we perceived. Jalis being one of the biggest example. Look at the shell now here. For centuries together, we've been building this kind of a spiral staircase. Somewhere, somebody took inspiration from this, and this is how they perceived the staircase like that. Similarly, in terms of design thinking, which is what we are now inheriting as design thinking, one of the biggest examples, I don't know how we missed, is that the stepwells of Jaipur. I think the biggest example is the vessel, which has been created straight, literally a evolution of that concept of stepwells, and he's proudly also saying that he's been inspired from. So this is a great evolution of the built heritage that existed yesterday. Dean already spoke about this, so I don't need to say much about that. But you know what it does? This is the sensible interpretation of yesteryear's work of the masters, and also climatic response to where you are building and why you are building. And I think that's how this building is. What it does so this is one of the projects that we did, and this is a project which is in complete urban cacophony in Delhi. It's in the worst area of Delhi. So this is contextual. Again, I always say that what Prachi said, that we work built to suit model, where the client context and the climate remains extremely important to me, because I don't build for personal glory or the glory of the architect. So this is a building that we had to create. This is a Japanese small company which had a headquarters in one of the really cacophonous area of Delhi in Kapasera border. You would know about that. There is visual cacophony outside. It's extremely dense outside, and traffic congestion and everything. But they wanted to build a headquarter in the corner plot. And we wanted to cut off all of that together, including the south-facing sun. And so there is a skin, which is obviously, for me, who's somebody from Rajasthan, been born and brought up with the jalis and seen jalis all my life. But this is the modern interpretation of jali, and we wanted to make sure that this is a completely maintenance-proof facade that we wanted to create. And this is what we did. The building is inside, but we wrapped it around with an aluminum jali, which has been perforated. And the material usage also is extremely important because, we wanted to ensure that it is maintenance-free. And there is a life cycle of project that all of us as architects need to look at all the time. And we've looked at the life cycle of a project in the area that it is, how it's going to be clean and everything, and that's why we put this. Again, if you see the quality of filtered light that's coming in, it's an office, so there is a provision to get the light, adequate light whenever. For me, it's blasphemous in any of my buildings to have any artificial lighting during the day, and at night, this is how the building behaves. This is another, a very abstract articulation of what the city that I lived in, Chandigarh. The Secretariat building has a lot of fenestration pattern, which is like that. This is a school that we were doing. The need for the fenestration pattern needed that we do these kind of louvers to cut off the sun, and that's what we did. So basically what I'm talking about is how design thinking is what we need to ensure that what we are creating today, as Sandeep said very rightly, is going to become heritage tomorrow, and we will have to learn to deal with. So perception is key to interpreting and understanding design. And I think let's, Dean, come on the stage and thrash it threadbare. Yeah, thank you. अपनी कुर्सी ला
Now, since we are short of time, I'm opening the floor for question and answer sessions, but we'll take only two questions since the time is less. So.
Point of view. See, a dome in German parliament was not only bringing light, it was making it democratic and it also mentally recreated the kind of memory that you would have had imaginarily. I'm not sure if the needle of London can be taken with the same breath or with same comparison, because right now it justifies itself thanks to every other building being low. I'm just wondering, every adjoining 20 plot had the same thing. Would it be appropriate and would it work the same way? So often we see that, okay, this is the first one, so it is that, but we forget that every other city's building be like that. Then we would question, including high-rise. If every other your neighbor was high-rise, you would not get that light view, ventilation, etc. we talk about. So DNA needs to be somewhere else. Even if we have vertical building, can we have multiple atria? Can we have places in between for gathering? I think that's what is the ethos that we can reinterpret. Nothing wrong with high-rise.
See, but this is something that is governed by something beyond designer's purview. If there is a high density and if it's a real need of that particular precinct or a province, as an architect, we should be a solution finder. I agree. Everything would always look nice if it is mid-rise, low density, wonderful. But all of us will agree that there is a specific reason for which in a concentrated area you require a high density. That has been happening all over the place. So it is really a very tough, very, very tough question and a quest. So there has to be a master plan which decides the skyline. That's what people have been talking about. Yes, you are right. If every building starts coming tall, what would happen? Yet it can sustain and yet it can celebrate the contextuality. As long as it is microclimate responsive, as long as it is sustainable, to me, it will work. Yes, but that building also is not a single user, it is a multiple user. There are a lot of things are happening in that building for giving it back to the community. So there are nice restaurants, cafes, exhibition areas, and all of these kind of things. So because you are taking some land parcel, you have to be, see, people are saying now, land belongs to city. and the airspace belongs to a developer. So people are trying to develop a porosity at the eye level where you are not taking away from people's freedom to move around, but go tall. That's the new challenges. If you'll see everywhere, you see the Toronto master plan, you see all of these places, it's inevitable. Trust me. Let's be prepared how we can address it well.
If I can add to that point, in fact, 111, which you showed, there's a very interesting article on it where it's hardly occupied, actually. It's a developer brand building exercise, and it's an investment exercise. It's basically to create these really fancy apartments, people buy it, and keep it almost like money in the bank, and hardly anyone stays in it. So that's the real pity of development. And I think really when you're looking at cities and identity of cities, I mean, most of our cities today are reliant on, if you look at Bombay, it's only South Bombay. Its imagery is from South Bombay. And all our cities, only the heritage of the cities is just 5%. And we rely on a little bit of heritage. Jaipur, for example, when I landed in Jaipur, I was expecting to see this pink city, and everything was white and white and white and gray. So it's very little of it is left, but we use that as our iconic sort of branding of our places.
Yeah, Dean, on that, I think, what you're talking about, the evolution of inherited perception. Sometimes, I think, Yatin, to answer your question, we need to break that perception, because you need to have disruptive thinking in architecture. It's extremely important all the time to be contextual. What was heritage yesterday, as I said, is now if you carry on doing that all the time, you will be repetitive. There'll be no place for you and me in this profession, because this is copy-paste. So if we are going to be disruptive in our thinking, only then we will be actually doing that basic perception of that. Only thing, if we use that intelligently, so we don't have to look at heritage purely from the spatial perspective or as a built form, but as everybody who's gone today to Nahargarh and realized that we also need to look at building techniques, and we need to evolve them to suit today's context also. I think that is true carrying forward of what is heritage yesterday.
Not to go on, not to deny, but see, on the contrary, what I'm strengthening is that there is a need to evolve what is a correct high-rise living. So it's not against high-rise, but in high-rise there are, by default, your lack of contact with ground. So how are we substituting that? There is a lack of neighborly feel. So how are we bringing in voids within? So for example, if I have 40-story building, can I think of quadruple of 10? I'm just saying, I'm not giving answers. I'm only clarifying my point. So if there was a typology that picked up on a DNA, not imitating, there's no word heritage, it's banned this session. But point is that if this is what we are used to as creating neighborhood where we can look out, can there be a vertical street, which is not a sky bridge?
So Yatin, I get you. So that's exactly what Salil has done in the project that he's shown, that even there are gardens, so I would call it villa in the sky or something like that. So he's been able to do that. So that's exactly what I'm saying. Evolved thinking means to take the positives of yesterday or the positives of whatever exists and take it in your new thinking. And I think that amalgamation is what makes your architecture unique and also forward-looking. As Melvin said very rightly, what are we leaving for tomorrow? Because people are going to be, actually buildings are all going to outlast all of us. So what are we leaving as a legacy today? Because what we are creating today is extremely important also. Unless we are contextual for today, people will say, oh, this is what they built. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also very interesting. I mean, as architects, we are generally very exclusive in what we design, of course, because we just wait for clients to come. But the fact that Melvin actually stays in a place which 80% of the housing is public housing. So that's the real challenge. Can we as architects actually intervene in public housing and make that really the model for people to go by? Because here we're creating these really rich, catering to the rich, and yet neglecting the major strata of society. Would you like to say something?
Sorry. So you talked about neighborhoods. In fact, in Singapore, we're exploring high-rise buildings, and we're talking about residentials with neighborhoods. Sky gardens happen at a certain intervals in our buildings. We do 40-story buildings, 50-story buildings. They do have intervals where maybe every 5 floors, they have a neighborhood. They have common areas that are public, and then they also have their private spaces. That's another way. But actually, I'm going to, because Vivek, you started with this whole idea of digital and perception. and I'm going to just challenge everyone here not to put ourselves on the spot, but a lot of things that we're looking at today, which are the basics of shelter, shade, ventilation, I'm going to even challenge that in 1,000 years' time, I'm fearful that we're going to be sitting in enclosed boxes. And maybe that architecture will have a place then, but is that the direction, and how can do we bring ourselves there, or do we take ourselves away from it? Maybe I'm going to ask the rest to talk about it.
But closed boxes mean coffins, sir?
So I guess we're already designing for the metaverse. So I mean, that ephemeral nature of architecture will always remain. And, the other day I've been listening to, because the topic of this entire discussion has been about heritage. And heritage without any adaptive reuse, I find, like the rest of us, Salil I'm scared of him, but I will make that statement again. Buildings also need to die. I mean, I'm just saying that there are meaningful buildings that are fine to stay as legacies and everything. But, somebody who comes from Delhi is dotted with all those tombs which have no use. Archaeological surveys come and barricaded that. It's, somebody like me, within 500 meters, if any property is there, you can't even create anything over there. So that is never going to get amalgamated with that city. In fact, it's of no use to that neighborhood also, because even kids can't go and play there. What I've been saying is, so be sensible in trying to do or preserving heritage. Why can't you open a library there? Why can't you open a cafe coffee day there, And that's the way we will be able to make them usable. And then people will want to preserve heritage. Otherwise, why wouldn't I use that property for the real estate value that it has? But yeah, Dean.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't spoken.
I'm listening, because it's a matter of perception, you said. Yeah, I could hear you very well. And it's like glass half full or half empty. That's what we're talking about. I generally see you say heritage. Now we have a national heritage of Latin City, North and South Block. I would just request you, what should be the usage? That's the national pride. There are certain things which I think we do not openly debate, but still we should debate upon that the great heritage of the Latin City, where we are practically now, the other things which we do not call as heritage is going to be demolished, and the rest of it is the Rashtrapati Bhavan and North and South Block, which will be Latin, the old 1919s one will be retained. Perhaps the use is, सबसे बाद में वो museum बना दो. That is the ultimate. So now I just wish to understand, why can't we precisely do something with the great heritage, as you have rightly said, make a use of it, such a prime property. And maybe I take a lead from Lower Museum, where there was an insertion of the glass pyramid in between, and they could make the basement below and integrate the whole thing put together. And if that large heritage could have a productive use for the nation to really be proud of. So that is the interface perhaps one needs to. Other thing which I wish to add here, that as Pandya has, very exhaustively into sustainable and other things put together, can we look into our human settlement? Land is never that we are scarce of land, we have a lot of land around. Can we really think of low-rise, high-density, which is more humane, which is more economical, which is more, with the nature, with many more things put together? That is what my perception is. It is again a matter of perception. So it's like creating a human settlement which is grounded, which is embodied with nature, and which is practically walkable. And now it's a fashion of today that I am creating a vertical walkable places, at a skyscape level, and I say I am advanced, and then I start putting into the green on that place, and I said I'm becoming a green. So perhaps that perception needs to be put in, wherein the transparency of the human race could really live in comfortably, precisely. But when I talk about, I am not saying that because मैंने कभी skyscraper बनाया नहीं, एक मिला था रुक गया, वो भी बना नहीं. So that is what I see is that not that skyscrapers are required to be made, but we need to see that we create a human settlement.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That was, as you can see, a very extensive answer to a single question. But one more question, I think, quickly. Yeah.
So, Sandeep, you said evolution is inevitable, and then anything futuristic, taking let's say 10%, 20% from your past, it gives you a future shock. So you know exactly what future shock works, But after 2 or 3 generations, it will be like Chinese whisper, Eventually, you will almost lose the inherited architecture completely. So how much future shock you need to give?
So, well, just to conclude, because this is a very interesting debate, cannot be encompassed in 1 hour's discussion. There are 2 things we are talking. The topic is here, evolution of inherited perception. Topic is not conservation of heritage. Okay, let's not confuse these 2 topics. Okay, conservation of heritage is a very, very important topic that has to be done. Adaptive reuse is also inevitable. You cannot just keep building more. Less is more. So you have to be very mindful when you build more. But how much you need to build more? How do you identify that? So the densification and urbanization is a totally different urban issue. And if that particular, see, Mumbai city has been now having 2 parallel Mumbai city. There's a Thane, there's a Navi Mumbai, there's another Mumbai. Yet it is not able to accommodate the kind of people that they want. There's a proper urban planner who have done the densification, and the FAR in particular area has come with some thoughtful purposes. It's not that people want to fancy and build a tall building and make their life difficult. Trust me. I mean, we can talk about this, but if that is a truth, I would not say, I'm not the person who can be dictatorial there, but if that's a truth, what are our answers? That's all I'm trying to say. Then you have to inherit those sustainable approaches, not only the architectural characteristics. Even high rises, as he said correctly, as we have been doing, can be sustainable, can be good, and things like that.
That is not the answer. My question was, if somebody takes example of shard and then evolves it further, after 3 generations, it will be totally futuristic, Then how do you carry forward that?
It will depend on that times. Like he said, the lifestyle may change. We are not developing buildings, we are developing a built environment. Suppose after 100 years, the total lifestyle or the civilization pattern changes, you will have to respect that as an experience. And the architecture will follow that. It will not have static kind of thing.
So then futuristic architecture gets more importance always than the heritage.
Vivek, I just tell you a very simple thing? You're thinking in silos. You're thinking only about architecture advancing to that level. Nothing else is advancing. How do you know that people will not be traveling in their personal pods to go to that place? How do you know that people will not be having the kind of vegetation? You'll put a seed and fruit will come within 6 months or something like that. So don't think about evolution is of entire mankind. Your mind is perceptive. So it's not that only architecture will evolve and nothing else will evolve. Like few years back, did you and I even think, I'm from that era where, there were no phones, of course, and all of that. So did I ever think that I'll be able to actually see a picture on the phone? All of that has changed. So I'm sure that people's living will change. Mode of communication will change. Mode of transport will change. What we eat, maybe we'll be eating a super pill. We don't need to go to the farms. We'll be eating a super pill, yeah? Like all the NASA scientists do that. Astronauts do that. So I think we need to also look at the entire process of evolution in totality and not in isolation, because we are flogging ourselves, with this debate. I really feel that we always flog ourselves with this debate of what we should be doing. Let us do our work earnestly. Let us be contextual. Let us respect the climate. How much of that climate change, I'm sorry again, I'm treading on very this kind of a path, but how much of the climate change is because of purely human? If the glacier is melting, you're saying that, oh, this much of heat and everything. I think somebody, Al Gore or somebody, has given another perception, and somebody else has given another perception. We should look at not something which is self-flogging for the entire architectural community. Extremely important to respect whatever the topic is about the evolution of perception, but at the same time not have the perception only in one single direction. Sorry.
Over to breakfast.
Thank you again. Thank you so much, everyone, for an enlightening session for all of us. And hopefully we all have so much to take from today's discussion. Now I would like to call upon Architect Niruttam Rathore and Architect Bhupesh Malav to felicitate our honorable speakers and moderator. Yeah. Architect Charanjit Shah, sir. Next is Architect Melvin H.G. Tan. Thank you, sir. Architect Sandeep Chikre. Thank you, sir. And Architect Vivek Gupta.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Niruttam sir and Bhupesh. Thank you.